Hi, friends. So, in this course, we're going to learn a lot about JavaScript. So, the first video, we're going to learn exactly what JavaScript is and what it's used for. And then in the lecture, we're going to set the stage for the rest of the course. So, it's really important that you follow this one right up until the end, all right? So, let's define it. JavaScript is a lightweight, cross-platform, object-oriented computer programming language. So that's our definition, but don't worry about it because I do want to explain to you what all of this means in detail. What about lightweight? Let's start with that. All right, so we're just talking about a language that doesn't overuse the resources of the computer. It doesn't use a lot of memory. And besides all that, it has a relatively simple syntax and features. All right, so what about cross-platform? It only means that the language can be used on multiple platforms and systems, so it's not just for web development. Finally, object-oriented. So this means that it's a language that's based on objects. All right, so you're going to learn all of this through and throughout this entire course. All right, so together with HTML and CSS, JavaScript is one of the three core technologies of web development. Now, as for web development, JavaScript was traditionally only used in the browser environment, which means that it was only a client-side language. Make sense? However, I want to tell you that more lately, thanks to a new technology called Node.js, developers are now able to actually use JavaScript in the back end on the server side as well. Now that we're not going to worry about here because that's a whole topic for another day, a whole other course. So we're not going to do that here. We're not even going to talk about Node.js anymore. Just mention at the beginning because this is one of the components of the JavaScript language itself. Okay, so this course will be covering how to use JavaScript in the browser. Okay, so what do you suppose is the most traditional way? The way we're going to do it. So in summary, JavaScript is what makes modern web development possible. It allows us to not only add dynamic effects and interactivity to more simple websites, but it also allows us to develop complex modern web applications that we can interact with and that almost feel like the apps that we use on our computers and phones every single day. It's pretty cool. So I do want to mention another important point, and that is these days there are lots of JavaScript libraries and frameworks out there that will implement different architectures. And it will help developers, well, all of these actually help developers build more complex apps a whole lot easier and certainly faster than ever before. So what am I talking about? Stuff like React or Angular or even jQuery. If you haven't heard about those, they are extremely popular libraries. Hopefully you are at least semi-familiar with them. But the thing of it is, they're all 100% based on JavaScript. So even before using them, developers actually need to really understand how JavaScript works, what you can do with JavaScript, and that way you'll be able to plug in libraries like nobody's business. So you need to really be able to understand the language itself, and that's exactly where this course comes in handy. Now, I mentioned earlier that with HTML and CSS, JavaScript is one of the core technologies of the web. So let's have a look a little bit deeper and talk about the role of JavaScript in web development. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all work together to create beautiful interactive and dynamic websites or even web applications. So HTML is responsible for the content of the page, the text, the images, buttons, and all the content that you see on the web page. It's all written in HTML. The CSS is responsible for the presentation of that content, right? So basically it includes all the styling and You can make some really great layouts of all the different elements on the web page. So then finally, JavaScript. Well, that's the real programming language that allows developers to interact with the application, like the interactive effects, manipulation of the content or CSS, and, well, so much more. So, to break it down again, HTML is responsible for the content, CSS is responsible for the presentation, and JavaScript for adding real programming capabilities to all those web pages and websites out there. So that's the role of JavaScript in web development. So before we wrap up this general overview, I want to quickly mention that there are different versions of the JavaScript language, but you don't have to fret about it. In this course, we're just going to start with the vanilla version of JavaScript, which is the first stable version of JavaScript. And then later on in the course, we're going to progress up to ES6. But you don't really want to think about that now. Instead, I'll just leave it for the end of the section, okay? So I think for now, you've certainly got a little better understanding of what JavaScript is and what it'll do on a website or web application. So let's take a quick break right here, and we're going to continue in the next section.